Welcome back, everyone, or welcome back to Crimson Gun Gaming. Some interesting updates have happened since I last made a video, and as I'm sure if you have watched any of the videos, you'll notice that I was talking a lot about AMD and their chips. And I think what's been very interesting is a lot of the discourse regarding a focus on how does it perform with graphics cards, and testing methodologies, and whether those methodologies make a lot of sense in the real world terms. Now, what I've seen a lot of is people pairing them with 1080s, and what there being is obviously a deficit in 1080p gaming. By no means even at 4K or 2K do either the 1700 or 1700X or 1800X have any real problems, but they do seem to have a variance or issue at 1080p when they're pushing the frames past something like 200 or 300 frames a second, and that seems to be an issue that has made a lot of people talk about how it's not better than Intel. Now, I think it's fair to say that you will lose, maybe 5 frames, and there'll be a deficit against the 7700K, which I think was not really surprising, given that we have a preference towards 4 core processors, and if you've got 4 processors that are better, then it's highly unlikely that you would have any problems.
We didn't penetrate their armor. The command delivered. He can't focus.
So I think that what we've seen what we've seen with graphics cards up until this point, what we've seen with processors up to this point has been a sort of steady increase in performance. Now, I think that's mainly because we've sort of perfected that particular kind of technology much more than we have elsewhere. And that change in performance, or the perfection in performance with Intel's 4-core processors, has meant a stagnation in the sort of workforce area. And if you compare it to other workstation processors, the 8-core processor is better. After watching a few YouTube videos where they've even talked to AMD have admitted this. Now, I think maybe AMD have made a mistake with their marketing, indicating that it is a processor, all-round processor, rather than saying that its entire purpose was always to be focused on productivity, and that it's actually better as a general processor as well as better at productivity at a cheap price. And I think there's been a tremendous amount of confusion regarding whether...
Punched right through their armor. The truck is damaged. Enemy armor is damaged.
French tanks actually during World War II were pretty good.
Another one like that should finish them. Critical hit. Don't stop.
This is a very slow tank. And I think the fact that a lot of people have been focusing on this has really been detrimental to competition. I think what we should really be doing is talking about the good rather than the bad processors, mainly because with such limited competition there is a desperate need to try and change what the market looks like. And I think if we don't, Intel will always control the market in such a way that we'll never have any kind of progression. And I think that is a real problem for us as consumers. Now, I suppose I'm going off topic really, what I really wanted to talk about. What I've really been thinking about for the most part is is this methodology of pushing processors to the very limit to see whether their single core performance or 4-core performance is better or worse? And I don't know whether that's truly effective for the consumer. I mean, it's highly unlikely that the 8-core processor is likely, with 16 threads, to become worse over time. Yes, it's definitely going to have a deficit in gaming performance if games focus on 4 cores or 8 threads as maximum performance. Now, if that's what they go for, then you're looking at a situation where we're not really moving forwards. And yes, as a gamer, you probably want to buy the i7, but when the 1700 reviews do come out, and I don't know why there aren't a tremendous number of them, I suspect we'll probably see that it's got just as good overclocking as all the other AMD processors that they brought out during the bulldozer era, where they just simply binned the chips to be better or worse, and you're still able to push the cheapest of those chips, the 8-core chips, to a certain level that you wouldn't have had otherwise. Now, assuming you can do that, you'll be in a position where the cheapest of the chips, around £319, is about the same price as the current i7, 7700K, and the 6700K probably is a little bit less effective at video gaming, just because it doesn't quite have that 5 GHz clock if you overclock, and if you spend the extra money on cooling, and if you spend more money on RAM, and if you spend more money on a motherboard. And I think this is something that isn't really being looked at from the perspective of, you're not looking at the wider impact of the actual setup that you require to push those kind of levels of performance. Now, I think if you say even the platforms at equal cost, you will see, I think, a deficit against AMD in single core performance, but obviously it'll be much more limited, and unless you're running with something that's really overpowered, you might well see both of the processors become obsolete by the time the equivalent to a 1080 is the mainstream card. Not playing too well here, but I think what you'll find is that with these kinds of processors, which one is going to last in the long term, probably at least the short to long term, is almost certainly going to be the AMD processor. As Intel moved to 6 cores, 12 threads, multi-threading performance will go up and single core performance will go down, because as it seems to be, there's a generic reduction in performance typically when you're looking at more cores. It simply isn't possible to get the same overclocking with those chips. It's always been that problem, and I don't see that changing. The multi-core chips are worse in single-core performance, and until the mainstream becomes multi-core and the utilization of multiple cores to produce information rather than single cores or less cores with higher clocks, you won't see the AMD really make many gains. Now, I think as we see AMD dominate the market more and more over time, I think you'll probably find that, given the fact that they've invested so much in the mainstream video gaming market, you'll probably see that multi-core or multi-threaded performance goes up as we move into video game consoles sort of slowly moving into that ultra multi-core threaded situation, and I think that will be
Gunner is dead. We're shooting blind.
Oh, I don't have any ammo. Oh. Okay. Suicide! I can't believe I didn't really need to resupply. I don't have any bullets. How tough is this tank? I can't believe that. That's stupid. Exit the garage. It should have said that I didn't have any. Maybe it did say it. Anyway, I'm only going to be doing 10-minute videos just to test how good the performance is in terms of my internet being somewhere else and having fibre optics, so we'll see whether that makes things a bit better for us. But all in all, I don't think that AMD's really given fair reviews at the moment. I think they're not really looking at what positives this multi-core or future step is making, and whether we're getting perhaps a single view of things take over the way we view stuff. Current performance might not necessarily be future performance, and I think the reviews that will sit there for a long time probably will become inaccurate. While I do agree that I think AMD to a certain extent has misled people, I think that's down more to poor marketing than anything else. Simply, if it had been marketed as a production processor, as in with all of the pros and cons of that, but with them much more mitigated than the Intel line and much cheaper, I think we will probably be looking at a consumer situation where people understood the processors that have come out. And I think the 6 cores will be aimed much more at higher clocks or consistently decent clocks with much lower prices, and offering similar, if not better, performance with more flexibility. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Thanks for listening. I'm going to talk a bit more about this as I try and crystallize the ideas and the thoughts I have on the impact of the reviewing and the impact of probably looking at things from a more controversial point of view that I think makes videos more interesting. While I understand trying to be recommending things purely from a gaming perspective, which I think is true, I think if you pair it with any graphics card, the Intel will be better in the short term. But when you don't have a bottleneck, so if you were using a 480 at 1080p Ultra, you're probably not going to be producing enough frames to make the GPUs themselves have any real effect on the performance in any meaningful way. And I think if that's the case, then we're moving into an era where I don't really see a tremendous difference between the two lineups, apart from the options that you have outside of video gaming, and whether more, like a few more frames makes a huge difference, at least at 1080p. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you later.